What we're doing here is going through some of these vines that have lost all their positions except for maybe on the extremities of these cordons. This is not a normal situation that we like to have. I'm going through and kind of evaluating what I need to have my crews do the next time that they come through. Hopefully, if everything goes to plan, we'll actually be trying to regenerate this arm right here with these two shoots here next year. We've raised this netting up. This net protects us from any hailstorms that can happen here on the high plains. So we've raised it up so you guys can see the crop, and it'll come right back down after they get through working. Recently we had some cold temperatures, and we have some technology that we've employed. We have a temperature inversion where the warm air that's generated from the ground goes up about 100 feet up in the air, and we use these big machines to blow that warmer air back down across the crop. We have a few acres that aren't covered by these machines that are actually stationary. So I have some guys become close with that live a couple hours away that have some helicopters, and we'll bring helicopters in, and the helicopter can actually do the same thing that these stationary machines do by going up in the air about 60 to 80 foot, flying across the vineyard, and they just keep pushing that warm air down for maybe 3 or 4 hours during the night to keep the vines above the freezing point. As you can see, we don't have any freeze damage. We're kind of in the middle of this vineyard right now. So it worked really well. What we're trying to do here is, this obviously is not normal. You can see that these positions have died off. We've got some growth out here on the end and some in the middle that we're trying to utilize. But what we'll try to do is we'll end up having to cut this off, and we'll take these two and we'll lay them down. This one's dead right here back to there. But that's what we're doing, is basically we regenerate as much as we can every year.
I got curious about wine when I was 19 years old. I was in college in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and some friends of mine and I were going on a road trip to San Francisco. On a map, a place called Napa was pretty close to San Francisco. I had a friend who lived in Napa, and so I called up Helen and I asked her, hey, could we crash at your place? And she said, of course. A bunch of road-weary college boys pull into Napa 9 o'clock one weekday evening, and we walk inside and the whole family is cooking dinner together. Everybody had a glass of wine in their hands. Wagner was playing in the background, and I'm like, what have I just encountered? I'm like from Hamburger Helper family. I have no idea what I've just stumbled into. Her father had just left a winemaking job at a pretty famous winery in Napa called Newton, and had produced his very first vintage called Consgard. The wine was exquisite. It was Chardonnay. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever tasted in my life. A few years later, I decided that I wanted to pursue monasticism. I lived at a monastery, and while there, one of the parishioners gave the fathers some grapes, ostensibly from which to make wine. One of the fathers, Father Joseph, asked me, hey, so do you know anybody who knows how to make wine? I call Helen and I'm like, hey, what's going on? She says, I thought you were in a monastery. I said, yeah, no, I am in a monastery, but we have some grapes here, and I think your dad, right? He's a winemaker, right? And she goes, yes. And so I called John, and he quickly ascertained that the grapes that were given were basically table grapes. John said, hey, I'm gonna help you guys out. And he connected them up with some growers in San Giacomo Valley in San Paulo Bay in California. And they started making wine in 2001 and have continued to do so ever since. I decided that I did not want to be a monk. I was 19, and it was a big decision at that time. So I went back to college, and then I got married in 2005, and my degree was philosophy and literature. I got my first job in retail at H-E-B, decided to work for a company called Republic, one of the big distributors here in Texas, and did fine wine sales and then eventually management with them. In 2013, my ex-wife and I purchased this property with the idea of eventually building a winery, planting grapes, and doing something on a very small scale. In 2011, I had met a dear friend, Lewis Dixon, who had a very, very cool approach to making Texas wine in a beautiful winery in Canyon Lake. And he was doing a very minimal approach to Texas winemaking. He was growing Black Spanish and Blanc de Bois and making wine without any additives, any yeast, any sulfur, all unfined and unfiltered. So with his kind of winery as kind of a template for what I thought I could do here in Texas. I worked with him a few years, took cuttings from his vineyard in 14 and 15, propagated them here at Trifon, and then in 2016 planted a vineyard. Quit my job in July of 2017 and then opened up Trifon on the feast day of St. Trifon, February 1st of 2018. Trifon is the patron saint of grape growers and gardeners and hunters and horses. Being a Texan and being that we love all things hunting and gardening and wine related, I thought not only is it a great patron saint for what we're doing here, but really a great patron saint, honestly, for Texas. For me, we're 100% about making the best Texas wine that we can with as minimal intervention in the cellar as possible, working with varietals that love and thrive in our challenging Texas climate. If you have very clean fruit and really well-grown fruit, really your job as a winemaker becomes more like that of a midwife. I like to say you're just trying not to drop the baby on the way out. I would say most of our wines are vinified in neutral barrels. We don't use any oak chips. I feel like the purity that we get through neutral barrel and then using French oak is really just kind of a background nuance element, really gives and preserves the freshness and finesse and elegance that I think Texas wines characteristically want to present.
Today we're at our French Connection facility. We are bottling wine for Calais Winery, which is one of our 2 wineries. All the Calais wines bottled by gravity, so we're not using a pump today. We are bottling Verdot from Nara Vineyards, so it's one of our really big, heavy reds. This is a wine that actually goes straight to our location members at Calais. We've had this wine in barrels for about 3 years, roughly 3 years. This is the time of year we bottle the wines. Most wineries do 18 to 20 months worth of aging, specifically when it's in French oak, which is what all those barrels are. We try to go extra long on barrel aging time for all the Calais wines. So we're at about 32 months in barrels right now for these guys, which tends to be what we do. We're about 30 to 34 months in barrels total. There's a certain time of year where we can get wine in a bottle. This is that time of year. Usually we're done bottling by now, but this year we had trouble getting bottles. It's just a time of year where vines are breaking buds. We're before crush season and after bud break. This is usually the time of year we put all our wine in the bottle. Everybody in the wine business tends to be putting wine in the bottle. We call it bottling season and usually starts about early February and we're done by April. This year we're dragging on a little longer because we had trouble getting bottles. Once the wine's ready, specifically on really long aging programs like we have, the wine is pretty weak and cannot resist any more oxygen intake. So we want to be very, very careful as we're going in the bottle. And that's why all the steps of sparging, that's why we run gravity. We try to make sure that the wine is going in the bottle without getting too shocked. The upside of doing gravity flow is that we do not get bottle shock, like if we're running through a line or through pumps or filtration. So all the wines are going in the bottle unfiltered, so they're really undisturbed. The exact same thing that was in the barrel is what is going in the bottle. So usually bottling day is not the winemaker's favorite day. Your best case scenario, wine goes in the bottle without getting messed up. So it's really, there's no real upside. The wine's not gonna get better because it's going in the bottle. So it's a day of really putting the wine safely in the bottle. Wines that have been in barrels for this long tend to be a little bit on the weaker side. That's why we're doing all the sparging and all different steps to prevent oxygen contact with those wines. We have the wine in our flex tank that the forklift is holding out there. We're gonna come here, it's gonna flow into the filler. This will be our filling station. We sparge all the bottles with nitrogen ahead. We're removing any oxygen from the bottle basically by replacing it with nitrogen ahead of us filling it. As this is gonna fill, the nitrogen that is in the bottle is actually gonna flow in the filler, which means that the top of that layer of wine is gonna be blanketed with nitrogen too. After that, we're gonna remove the bottles from the filler. We're gonna place them on the corker. It's gonna drive a cork into the bottle, and then we're gonna be packaging the wine. Usually we do put labels on at this stage, but the labels will be here tonight, so we're not labeling today.
Yeah, we're here at the winery here in High. So we have a couple of different facilities, a beautiful facility at Lost Straw Cellars in Fredericksburg. And then we have another barreling facility and case goods facility down the road at Miracle Mile. This is our main facility here in High, Texas. This is where our bottling line is. So when we're putting together our wines, our whole winemaking team gets together, we start tasting through blends and make sure that we really pare down and get the blend that expresses where the wine's from the best. We're looking at a lot of different factors in that: balance, acidity, finish, and then also a representation of where the wine's grown. It's very, very important. Once we figure that out, which could take up to a couple of months, we'll put that wine together. We'll bring the blend here to this facility where we'll go and drain all the barrels, put those barrels into tank, and then stabilize the wine, make sure the wine's clean and ready to go into bottle. When that wine gets pumped in to the filler bowl, we dump glass, and then glass comes through and gets blown out with inert gas like nitrogen or argon, and also displaces the oxygen that's in the bottle. And then the bottle gets filled and then goes straight over to the corker. And at that time, there's a little bit of deaeration that happens. So we pull out any oxygen, we make sure the level's full, and then we blow a little bit of nitrogen in there right before the cork goes in, and then straight on to the labeling process. We have one of the nicest and the most technologically advanced bottling lines in the world. And, you know, making wine here in Texas, you know, there's not like a bottling line store you can just go down and go, you know, buy a gasket or a washer or something like that. So it's very important to us to have the highest quality technology and engineering in order to not be down. That doesn't mean we're never down. It does mean that we're down a lot less, and we have a great support from our manufacturer. How do we choose the bottling line? We just pick the most expensive. No, really, if you look at bottling lines, there's only 2 companies that have been around for 30 years plus. Colopac represented some of the same manufacturers for 30 plus years. We chose those guys, which is a big decision. It's probably the most expensive piece of equipment that we own besides a harvester. Pretty important. It touches every single bottle, every single bottle is an extension of me and Bill and our team here. So it's super important to make sure that it's freaking perfect every single time. It's hard enough to make the wine, but you don't want to get it screwed up by some little thing that happens in bottling or some QC issue that happens. On price on bottling lines, I think ours was about $340,000. We've added a few little components to it, so it's probably in the $400,000 range now, which is crazy that it's that expensive. You could probably get into a monoblock for 40 or 50, maybe 70,000, but maybe not with the nice labeler and the capsular. You don't want to be looking at your wine at a restaurant and then see a crooked label. Every now and then we'll pull like an old 2008 bottle or 2009. And, back in the day, we just had a little 6-spout filler and like a hand corker, that you could still see the punch in the cork. And then you go to taste the wine and you see that there's a little fold on the cork and the wine's oxidized or something. It doesn't happen very often, but it definitely happens more when you use that lesser quality equipment. And it sucks that if you hold a wine for 10 or 15 years and then you go to open it up and it's messed up, all because maybe the wine was made perfectly, but it wasn't bottled perfectly. And those little things happen, which is really, really a bummer. So we got to get it perfect every time. That's what we're aiming for.